Thank you all, our distinguished and esteemed panelists, and thank you to the audience who have stayed back for this. Trust me, we've saved the best for last. Today's panel will look at tripling the bottom line: people, workplace safety, culture change, and the private sector. And I like how the last panel touched on how important it is to have women empowered in the workforce, because it shows in the bottom line. It shows in the home and it shows in the workplace. So I'll start by getting our esteemed panelists to speak to this topic for 3 minutes each, and then I'll launch into my set of questions before opening up questions and answers to the floor. So I'll start with Dr. Ndukwe, then Mr. Azeez, and then Mr. Ighodalo. So in 2-3 minutes, and I'm looking at the time, just to speak to this topic.
First of all, let me thank Nkiru and the other members of AWB for inviting me to this event. I don't know whether it's because I have 3 daughters, that's why I was called in to speak at this event. I'm always very surprised when people talk about gender-based violence and things like that. But let's talk about tripling the bottom line. Tripling the bottom line is a new concept which tends to talk more about not just concentrating on financials, but also going into other areas like giving back to society and things like that. So I'd like to say that at MTN, we do a lot in terms of ensuring that we're not just concentrating on the business in terms of profit, but also doing other things that will enhance our acceptance in the society and also give back to the society in many respects, and be one for change and for good causes as far as the Nigerian environment is concerned. Let me also say that culture is a very important aspect of any business. And during the previous section, or the one before the last one, there was talk about tone at the top. I think I want to emphasize that that is critical. Some people have talked about the issue of policies and the like. But if the tone at the top is wrong, if the tone from the leadership is wrong, you can't really get much done in terms of policy. And thirdly, when it comes to within the organization itself, there was a lady that talked about higher level of reporting that goes to the group level of the business. That is also very important because if there is no way of reporting what has happened and the person has to leave the organization because he's been badly treated or he or she has been badly treated, that is not good enough. It means that there is something wrong somewhere. So in my organization, there is a very big importance attached to whistleblowing. And when a whistleblower reports, it actually goes to the group level, not even to the Nigerian business. And it is compulsory that any whistleblowing report is investigated. So it's not a question of deciding whether to go about it or not to go about it. So that also has its own advantage of putting people in check, knowing that you can't really escape it if you're found guilty. And of course, what happens to that person is, your guess is as good as mine, because the person loses the job immediately, no matter how highly placed. And that is the truth of the matter. So I'll stop that, and maybe we'll continue later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. One round of applause for that submission. I'll move to Mrs. Azeez.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. And AWB, you're doing very well. When I was invited to join the panel, I mean, I'm not taking speeches at the moment because I'm on to a different course. But this was a topic that spoke to me, and I was very happy to come and contribute. Tripling the bottom line. That is what the theme we were given. And when I was hired, okay, let me step back a bit. I recently retired last year, December, after 30 years working in a corporate organization. I was hired to triple the bottom line, right? I was working for an international organization. They were not doing well, and I was told to come and fix it. They needed to make money, and that was it. So there was me, a Nigerian, working for a German bank. So I needed to straddle two values, two beliefs, two cultures in this space, trying to make money. Now, I took it on, but I knew that I would come across challenges. The challenges of the Nigerian factor and the discipline, the zero tolerance of my international German organization, and trying to make them money and to triple, if not quadruple, the bottom line. Now, when I joined, I thought, how was I going to do this? Because I was given the values and I was given the beliefs to work with. By the time I went through the induction, the training, and I had to breathe and walk these values and beliefs, which was my compass in the entire 30 years, right? I mean, there was no way that I couldn't deliver. And I'll share them with you very, very briefly, because it's something I've also tried to not copy and paste, but copy and encourage to the boards that I sit on. Because it's one thing to have values and beliefs, it's another thing for there to be a buy-in of your staff who are going to walk the talk of those values and beliefs to ensure that the bottom line is tripled. Bottom line is what? Profit, make money. And we all talk about it. What is the bottom line? Give us the talk. Now, there was discipline, was the first one. We protected the firm's resources, and we were always thinking and acting like owners of those resources. There was integrity. We live by the highest standard of integrity, right? With everything we said or we did. We did not do what was right. We did what was right, not what was allowed. Sustainable performance. We did not look for those deals that we needed to get shortly. We looked for long, successive deals that would bring value to our shareholders and stakeholders. Client centricity. Client centricity is important. They were at the core of our organization, and of course we earned their trust. The next thing was innovation. We actually also constantly, repeatedly ensured that all our platforms were newly engaged, and we were actually ensuring that everything that we could do to improve the processes worked. Partnership, all our stakeholders, all our regulators, we made sure that we were on good terms with them. Now, you cannot have these 6, I call them DISC IP, as your values and beliefs. You built it, you worked it. What did we achieve? My German organization achieved a strong, healthy ecosystem, a strong, healthy workplace, and a strong organization. By believing in all of that, we had no problem tripling the bottom line. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to Mr. Ighodalo.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really glad to be here. It's not a cliche, but I think it's a no-brainer. If you have an environment that's not balanced, men and women, If you have an organization that's not balanced men and women, it's a no-brainer. That organization cannot perform at its optimum. So from very early on in my work life, I knew that we all brought different strengths into the organization. And those strengths helped propel the organization to be the best it could be. So I never understood why there was this obvious bias against one gender, either culturally or otherwise. And I thought, there's a problem here. We're not being as smart as we really should be. Because someone talked earlier about using all your guns. We're not using all our guns. And so from early on, I've always been fully biased in favor of women. And that has come from my bring-up, how I was brought up. I was listening to Alex earlier, and Alex said something like as if you and I were brought up from the same home. And I was going to go to that as my third topic, but since I've started it, I'll say it here. And I'm happy that there appear to be more women here than men. Fundamentally, we, the women, are the problem. And I'll tell you why. You're bringing up your kids at home. The girl, make the bed, clean the house, do the shopping. The boy, play Nintendo. So you started the misalignment and the unbalanced mental attitude from that age. And I've said this before when I've spoken about this. I grew up with the yellow bucket. My sister, when she was at home before she went to secondary school, had charge of the yellow bucket. The day she was stepping into secondary school, I took charge of the yellow bucket. The yellow bucket was full of my mother's underwear. You wash it, you iron it, you have it set. You know, we cooked, everybody in the house cooked, everybody in the house cleaned, we were equal. So we grew up with the mentality that we're all the same. We're all equal opportunity. So it never occurred to me when people started talking about it. I didn't understand what bias was until people started talking about it. So I think, basically, you know, you women in the room deal with the problem at home. Let's start from there. And I hear someone has talked about this in the morning, and it's fundamentally correct. I grew up in a home where my mother broke the glass ceiling when there were no women around. And we're talking about 1966. No women around. She was the first woman permanent secretary. So it was easy for me to align with women, understand women, and understand that in any environment, we needed to have this balance. But we found ourselves where we are, so what to do about it? We need to take, I wouldn't call it affirmative, I'll call it the common sense deliberate action. That is, in every organization, you must look at what you have. How come at the beginning, it's the women that do best in the tests for employment? How come? But then how come when we get to 10 years in, when the women are about in their 30s, the women start falling off? I think it was Chike that talked about it. They're at the stage where they're making family, balancing the home. How come the organizations don't take that into consideration? That how do we keep those who are going to contribute to our productivity, bottom line, emotional intelligence, integrity, and strengthening the firm? How come we don't look at the best way to keep them? Again, someone said it, COVID has helped us realign and has helped a lot of common sense come into play. But any organization that does have institutional sense will make arrangements where in the most important years of the women's lives, they're able to still perform optimally at home and also perform extremely optimally at work. So you allow for them certain, I don't want to call it indulgences, but that's what they are. You allow for them certain things that enable them to be able to perform optimally in both places. So when
Mr. Ighodalo, you're already answering my next question, and I like how you're talking about
all
the
I just want to say is
change.
that we need to, because of where we are now, have deliberate action to bring women in those 10 years when they're in middle management to make them stay in middle management. And then maybe I'll get the chance to talk about one point Chike made about just below partner. I don't fully agree with Chike. You know, if they're there just below partner, they'll get to partner. And if you see what's happening because of what Lamido did in the financial sector, we now have about 8 or 9 women that are chief executives of banks. So the deliberate act must work. It's just common sense.
I'd like Dr. Ndukwe to weigh in on that and also to look at the cultural aspect, because in the one hand, we have culture in the home and that permeates. So a man is brought up to see his sister as subordinate, and he takes that into the workplace and expects all the women, even those who are more qualified, to be subordinate. So how do we begin to change that in the workplace? Because that leads to the toxicity, that discourages women, and it also results into that gender-based violence in terms of the bullying, the assault, which is not always physical. Dr. Ndukwe.
Let me say that personally, it's difficult for me to actually understand the problem because I've not really experienced it. With the various organizations I've worked for, and I've been managing director of a private company, I've been chief executive of a government-owned establishment, and now I'm chairman of MTN. In all those organizations, I've not really seen any serious issue about gender-based either violence, and I dislike that word violence because it's only a cowardly human being that goes into the extent of violence. But if it's a properly structured organization, you can't have violence in the workplace. In fact, in the Federal Civil Service, when I was in government, it's actually an offense to fight. One, it's an offense to abuse. But I guess over time, some of these rules, and that's why when some people talked about policy and rules, if the tone at the top is wrong, maybe the whole thing collapses. Because, and I liked what the lady in blue here, I've forgotten your name, Olu, talked about the fact that the new generation of ladies today, I don't think they'll keep quiet when they are being abused or treated wrongly. And I think what the mothers did in the past is totally wrong. And I don't think anybody should accept to just stay in an organization because he or she will lose a job. Perhaps when people start reacting against those things, then people will sit up. But anyway, for culture, I think organizations must take positive and drastic effort to build a culture where equality is recognized in the workplace, where abusive words are punished or discouraged completely, and where people have a way of reporting when there is a problem of that nature in the workplace. I think when we do that, somehow the organization will be able to surmount some of those difficulties. But when you have bad people in an organization, they'll continue to be bad people. It's actually when they are bad and they're not made to be accountable of their bad behavior, that's when there's a problem.
Yes, I think we can have a female perspective on this, and I like how you juxtapose the two cultures. I mean, we have Germany, who has had a female chancellor, and they've done so well. So how do you see, or what lessons can you draw from that international experience, just like you said in the 6 values? And personally, have you been a victim at some point of this violence, even if it's not physical or sexual, like we always think, but bullying or being intimidated or said, why are you in the room? This is for the boys. Have you also experienced that?
I'll just speak to your point, sir, and it's all related, right? That even though you're not aware of what is going on, what I tend to see and I've realized, because I've actually intervened in organizations where my mentees are sexually harassed, We're talking about harassment. We're talking about bullying. It's not necessarily violence. So when that occurs, what then happens is that they're timid, they're young, and you'll be amazed at the law firms where some of these are happening, where the senior partners are there late at night having meetings, structuring trips to have these women there. And we've said it over and over again. They cannot say anything because they're watching their end-of-month pay. Segueing on to Germany and the values and the culture that occurs where I work, I was lucky. I'm not going to make any pretenses about it. I was lucky and fortunate to have worked in an organization where everything that they did was above board. Everything that we did, from your meetings, to your timeliness, to your culture, to your regulators, we just needed to be extremely professional, man or woman. So the resources were there to enable us perform. And we performed extremely well. Like I said, the reason I was hired was to make money for Nigeria. So going back to how some of these things should be dealt with and whether we know or not, I listened to the last panel. I was telling the moderator that I wish I was in that panel. Excellent perspectives came to light. Excellent. Now, one of the things that I didn't see or hear, I told her, was when we have this sexual violence or discrimination, stereotyping, biases, and all of that, there should be the tone from the top and a zero tolerance. I always say something. If you do not like the fruit, kill the seed. You set the example. You set the tone. And anybody else trying to come near it would not smell it. Because if you let it fester, what sets in? Toxic. The environment becomes toxic. Everybody's closing their eyes to it. They're looking the other way. And even the leadership may be aware or pretending not to know. So my issue is, Germany is good. We are gender equality, gender parity, gender equal pay, equal opportunities, and they're doing well. There are one or two odd cases that may occur, but when they occur, they're decisively dealt with. Thank you. I'll stop.
Thank you very much, Ma. Mr. Ighodalo, I know how you raised the point about having a lot of women in leadership, and you wanted to speak more on that. We're seeing that change now, and I know it's in the banking sector and needs to filter into the legal sector and all of private sector. But when these women get there, then what? How can they use their agency and that position to actually ensure that they create healthy and safe spaces for not just women, but the entire workforce to thrive?
Thank you very much. My thinking was that women made great leaders. When I start talking to those just below the women and a few rungs down, many of them complain very seriously about women bosses. They say the women bosses have gone up and they've pulled up the ladder. The women bosses, maybe because they had a lot of difficulty getting to the top, expect them to go through the same difficult steps. And they say generally, I prefer having a male boss, and that helps my progression to the top much more than the women bosses. Maybe I should talk to the women too. And maybe I should ask you that doing a soul search, do you actually ask of a higher standards from your women subordinates than the men? Do you, subconsciously? Because there are a lot of younger women that think that the women do, and the women don't create a level playing field. And I think the women bosses should look inwards and start trying to think, how can we as bosses mentor, support, help? We'll keep meritocracy. We won't favor, we won't be biased. But how do we mentor, help, make life easier for those coming after us? Because one of the things I learned from early on was that When I started out life as a professional about 40 years ago, I know women had to work 3 times as hard as men to get the same thing. You know, now it's not that bad, proportionality, but I know it's still not as we would all want it to be. It's not that bad. But honestly, my suggestion, I think the women, as you go into the top, as you go into the corner office, mentor other women, help them, support them, teach them work-life balance, how they cope with the home, how they cope with the office, and how they perform optimum in both. One more thing for the women, and I think it's necessary, although it's a bit away from the question you asked. If you're ambitious and you have a life ambition, and you know what you're about, you have to be careful in the choice of your life partner, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever it is. If the person doesn't share your ambition, you're cooked.
Words on marble right there. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. We'll take some questions. Do I see any hands up so we can get the microphone? And just as you were speaking about the role of mentorship, I know the panel before also spoke about sponsorship. So it's one thing to mentor, but how are they gathering the resources to support these women? And I know WIMBIZ, organizations like WIMBIZ, Whisker, are already doing things, but it can still be more. And I'm sure Mr. Azeez would like to weigh in on that, but I would like to take questions first. So we'll take 2 questions.
Thank you very much, panelists. I just want to know, where do we situate the family in this whole conversation? Considering the fact that the tendency of people to bully, to harass at workplace may not be unconnected with the kind of family background or upbringing they have. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll take the second question so we can answer all questions. Please, can you get the mic to Dr. Balong?
Thank you, panelists. Great session. But I wanted to, so there's this whole idea of women being responsible for the things that happen to us. Everybody's like, oh, what are the women doing? So that's something I would like you to talk about. But also there's the whole idea of what you call sextorship. I don't know if you've heard it before. Like, you know, Nigerian men always say, oh, but the women came to me. We had the Dean of Faculty of Law. He said, oh, they will come and be begging and holding hands. And then what? That's my question. And so what, they came to you? You're in the position of power. You're using your power, your influence. So where is your responsibility? Stop saying, I'm responsible for the things that happen to me. I'd like you to sort of like shed some light on that, because we're always saying, oh, the women should do better. The women. What are you doing differently?
And I think that last question ties into the narrative of where the focus is on the woman, the focus is on the victim, the focus is never really on the perpetrator, and they don't always feel that shame and stigmatization. It's the woman who is afraid because, again, she's like, why were you at that office? But being at that office doesn't give the man the right to go against the law, because this is breaking the law. I think we'll take it
maybe
from...
ladies first, right?
Yes, and then we'll walk down.
Okay. I'll speak to the question about what role does the home play here? I'm also of the belief that sometimes you're a victim of your background, 1. Number 2, if you're being harassed at work, are you discussing it with your spouse at home? 2, you're also talking about work-life balance. It's all rolled into one together. Now, the home front is essential to ensure that when you get to the workplace, you are there to blossom, flourish, thrive, and reach your full potential. But if there is an issue in the house, or you could have a situation, I remember one incident where she was being harassed in the workplace and she was being abused at home. So my question was, what is the organization doing? What are you saying? Did they notice? Did they see that your productivity has gone down? Did they see that you're no longer passionate? Can you talk to HR? Is there an intervention that can occur? It's a double-edged sword. It's difficult, and this is where mentorship comes in. You need to talk to somebody how to deal with this, because it is not a straight answer or an issue where you think there's a finite solution to it, right? So again, the lady must have the support and reach out to help, because that will signify a cry for help. And her superiors or HR should notice it. Now, going back to what Nkiru said about the professor who came to the door, the woman came. You already answered the question. If she did, then you shut the door at her. It's a two-way traffic. So the issue about focusing on the victim and leaving the perpetrator, I mean, when I saw that question, I said, it's a two-way thing. You do your interrogation, you do your investigation on both sides. Sometimes we have seen cases where the women lead themselves to it and the men are indisciplined. So sometimes you say you carry it on yourself. But if you are also a responsible leader in an organization and you want to set the tone, because you see women sometimes even in the office, the way they dress to work. I see that, I shudder at it, all the tight-fitting clothes and the tight-fitting tops at the bottom. Your HR, they should have a dress code in what we do. Because you cannot sometimes help, and I'm not saying the men have any excuses, but sometimes you conduct yourself in a decent manner. And once you do so, you don't attract some of these unnecessary advances that may happen. So sometimes we need to check ourselves.
I'd like to talk about the family. I think that's a very important point, because charity, they say, begins at home. When you have a background of abuse at home, for instance, or you have a background of disrespect for women, and it also comes to the point that Asue made earlier, which is about, I think we are operating at our levels now, which is a very high level. When we go down to the villages and the lower level people, all this grammar we are speaking here, they don't understand. They are structured in a particular way. The women, there are mothers who have caught their husbands taking advantage of their daughters, and they kept quiet. Can you imagine? So sometimes the orientation of the person is so important. And even in our traditional institutions, you know, today, when a woman's husband dies, and you go to some cultures, it's the women in those villages that subject the widow to all kinds of indignity because of the so-called culture of the place. So I think family is so important, but going back to the workplace, I think the workplace must be structured in such a way that things like that are not tolerated. And like I said before, the tone must be right at the top, and there must be certain things that are put in place to punish bad behavior and make sure that things like that don't go without sanctions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Just before Mr. Ighodalo responds to the question, I would like to take one question from Mr. Alex Irene.
Yes, sorry, I just had to interject on that last point. We've spoken about organizations being the custodian of what the right behavior should be, especially law firms and private sector, or indeed public sector. And I worry we're starting to see a similarity here between the outer world and how we view some of the incidences there. I'm speaking particularly to rape, and the organization. So I'm speaking directly now to the comment on dress code. If you have a dress code, and I must say, dress codes are designed, yes, for decency, work practicality, but overall, a representation of the brand, right? You want your people, when they go out, people see them, it's a representation of the brand. So definitely decency. But I don't know if we can excuse action that is aligned to anything that connotes the acceptance of behavior just because she was dressed like this. It is the human being's prerogative, for as long as they are not breaking any fundamental laws, they can wear what they want, if it is within the dress code. But it can't be the reason, and perhaps this is a question to the panelists, could it be the reason we understand why a man or a woman behaves in an inappropriate way? So it really is a question. So I think...
Alex, I think you've answered what was going to be my response to my sister. I don't think it's an excuse. I don't think it's acceptable. A man shouldn't, because a woman is dressed in a way, think that he then has a right to lose his own self-discipline. I don't think so. I agree that there should be a dress code for branding, for good order, and all of that, but then that's no excuse. So I was going to come to that. I was going to say that. So that would be my answer to your question, and or to your comment, and that would have been my response to her. It's no excuse. But then let me just go straight to all the other questions. For me, straight up, zero tolerance in the organization from the top. Clear. If everybody is clear from the top down that there's real zero tolerance and that there is no sacred cow, so if the boss is the person that infringes, then they face the punishment and it trickles down, then that helps that institution to stay strong. And then there's the discipline. And I agree with you. You know, we can't continue saying it's the woman's fault. You know, I'm a father of girls, my nieces. I just don't want to understand that you will say it's my daughter, she walked into the office, the way she walked or the way she talked, suggested. You know, it's totally unacceptable. So you will, and I'll tell a quick story here. And that goes back to what you said the lecturer was saying. For a few months in my life, before, like at the beginning of youth corps, before I went on to my second degree, I taught briefly in a school in Ibadan called Aberdeen College. And after about 2 weeks teaching, the principal called me into his office and said, "We have a problem." I said, "We do?" He said, "Yes." He said, "The women in the staff room and the students in the classroom are fighting because of you." I said, "Fact?" He said, "Yes, fact." I said, "So what do you want me to do, sir? I don't need to be here anyway. I'll ask you." He said, "No." He said, "Stay on, but be conscious of it, you know?" And then I started noticing all kinds of little notes to me under my books and all that. So I said, well, what am I going to do? So I devised a system. I had a girlfriend then. So I then said, you know what? You'll drop me at work, take the car away, and then you'll come before I finish, and you'll sit in class with me, sit in the staff room with me. And I said, that was my way of approaching it. But I'm just coming to the point that all those things will happen, but you must be disciplined about it. It's not that people are saints, but if you're not disciplined, you get into trouble. You have to be disciplined in every aspect of your life. And when you're not disciplined, you should be ready for the consequences of your action. You know, once we know that very clearly, a lot of things will fall into place. So, zero tolerance at the top. The organization has to ensure that it has a structure whereby those who breach get punished. I was really perplexed about 3-4 years ago. I chaired a panel, MBA panel, on this same subject. And when I researched, I found out that in law firms, 1 in every 2 women gets sexually harassed. 1 in every 14 men gets sexually harassed. 1 in every 3 women get bullied. 1 in every 4 men get bullied. I just thought, what's going on here? And honestly, until I did that research, I didn't know. I didn't know we had such serious problems. And get this, the common law countries, Nigeria, UK, Canada, US, Australia, New Zealand, they were the worst. We would think it's with the French or something. No. And we started thinking, what could be the cause of this? So I talked to the NBA president at the time, and I said, we need to set up a committee. We need to deal with this. And then I went back to my own law firm, and I said, come, guys, let's put in place proper structures, and let's make sure these things don't happen. Now, people didn't say, and I can't swear that things weren't happening. But I then immediately said, you know, guys, we must put in place proper structures, and all you guys, zero tolerance. If you want to play, let's play out of here. You know, here, we won't play. Because there are people that have left their daughters, left their wives. We work late at night. We work under great pressure. We need to be able to trust the system. So, for me, it's discipline, zero tolerance at the top, and then let's stay true to ourselves. And, you know, for the women, you know, the value system in the home. Insist your spouse helps you in the bringing up of your kids. You know, it's fundamental. Insist that your spouse also shows example. You know, don't have boys that saying they can't eat second-day soup. When you say you can't eat second-day soup, that means when your wife comes back from work at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m., she starts cooking. You know, it doesn't happen. Who gets home first? Arrange the food or order. Now it's easy. You can order food from elsewhere. So, you know, we have to start those values from early on. It amazes me when strong women, just last thing, it amazes me when strong women in the workplace, get home and they allow all kinds of funny things to happen at home. It's strange. It's the same. You see, you just travel from office
Thank you, Mr. Ighodalo.
and things
I'll
change.
have to jump in here. Thank you very much. A warm round of applause. And I'll take that as your final submission.
All right, thanks. I think my question was really around the conversations that are another version of what Nkiri was alluding to, which is the conversation that you shouldn't move the burden to the women alone, right? And when we're talking about violence in the workplace, yes, the tone should be set from the top, but also within the organization is actually where the bulk of the work gets done. And so setting the tone there and people understanding what's acceptable behavior at those levels is actually much more important because we have organizations, and we can name them, that have, you know, there's zero tolerance at the top, yet we're still dealing with the issue, right? So the second point then is really around is there in the leadership teams where we've recognized this issue around violence, and it's emotional violence, it's emotional, it doesn't have to be actual physical violence. When somebody is touched and brushed every day before they get home, it's a form of violence. And so do we have conversations with the men really about their responsibilities at home and making sure that they are making sure that these are safe and conducive environments? And that they also understand that, you know, it's not about risk aversion, about making sure that people do what they're supposed to do to avoid these things, but that the perpetrators really have an understanding that they're not supposed to do this, period, that behavior is not acceptable, regardless of what you see. Is that conversation happening with men? Because the conversation today seems to be focused on women need to raise kids better. But are there men? Part of the problem, I think, is also in the framing of that, the assumption that it's the women that's doing the raising. When we get to a point where we recognize that men can also be at home and be the primary caregivers, then we're moving forward. So are we having those conversations and prepping people's minds that it's okay for men to start thinking that way?
Thank you very much. Just because she's taking part of my time, I'll just say 2 sentences. One is that we must distinguish between the workplace and the family. There is nowhere at the workplace you start getting involved in what happens at home. The workplace, people must try to set the tone right from the top and make sure they keep to it, and people have consequences for bad behavior. But second thing I want to say is that there are obvious problems when you go from one corporate organization to another. When you have a corporate organization where the big man, the owner of the company, is involved in this bad behavior, I think you have a problem. it's a problem that you cannot solve. You just go in there, and if the culture is not right, start looking for another job immediately, because you're not going to make a difference. So that is the way I'll look at it. And let's also admit that no matter how utopian our environment is, there is no single corporate organization where you wouldn't have one or two instances where these things would occur. It's just like stealing and other offenses that happen in organizations. It's just for us to be able to look out for them and then cut them off as soon as they rear their heads so that they don't fester. Thank you very much.
One round of applause for Dr. Ndukwe.
That was well said, sir. My own closing comments, without necessarily going into an argument with Alex or Asue, is simply to say that I come from a generation that think that way. And I have no apologies for it, because I believe in a case of prevention is better than cure. They are liberal men, they grew up with women, and they believe that, yes, discipline must be the order of the day, and I agree with them, okay? So it's a matter of different strokes for different folks. Now, the other thing that Mr. Ndukwe said, which happens, is what do we do when the perpetrator is the headship? That is a serious issue. And I am glad that this conversation is on the table. Please let us not take it off the table. It is something that is eating our organizations. It is something that is driving our young girls away from corporate work. And some of them are saying, I'm just going to get a business of my own. Because anywhere they turn to, they don't seem to get the protection or the support that they want. The organizations definitely is the keeper of this. They're not doing enough. I know for a fact, and if we do the research, they're not doing enough. My closing comment, which I want to say to you, is that the Lagos state government recently set up an agency backed by legislation. I happen to know the lady who is running it, and she actually wants to make a difference when it comes to domestic and sexual violence. Her name is Titilola Adediji. I encourage the AWB and the NBA to reach out to her, where you can also help her to ensure that certain things are set right from the office or from wherever. So I was speaking to a couple of people. They didn't seem to know about her, but they really, really want to make it, because it is a real issue. It is a killer. I call it the silent killer in the corporate sector. So we really, really need to address it and keep it on the table as we continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A warm round of applause for Ms. Azeez. And I think in that note, what we can draw out, even if we stay on one side of the fence or the other, is that both men and women are responsible. It's not a woman's problem, it's not a man's problem. The same responsibility a woman has is the same responsibility a man has in having these conversations, in modeling this in the family so it extends into the workplace. And I'll just advise everyone who is here, or challenge everyone, that beyond having these conversations and leaving them on the table, what are we going to do when we go back to our homes as mothers, fathers, daughters, brothers? What are we going to do on our platforms? What are we going to do in our workplaces? And how are we going to reach out to organizations like the ones you mentioned, African Women on Board, who are already doing this work, and supporting them? And I think the gender equity certification is one way to hold these organizations accountable, and not just look at top level, but all through the organization where these things are happening. Please put your hands together for our esteemed, our hot, powerful, I told you I saved the best for last, power panel. Thank you very much for your time.